As we return to thinking about the God who wants to comfort us, and as we begin to think a little bit more about what it means to experience the fullness of an intimate relationship with Father, I think it's important that we do realise that our human experiences shape our decisions, our choices, and our feelings. We make choices about how to respond to situations based upon our own experiences. Sometimes we react without realising that we react, whereas other times we're making a conscious choice to either respond in a certain way or not respond in a certain way. We have the opportunity to have an intimate relationship with a Father who understands what we go through and wants to comfort us in our time of need. But I wonder what barriers we put up to that. How can our experiences shape our response to that intimacy of a comforting Father? Some of the barriers we have to experiencing that can be summed up with 6 S's, and I want to suggest it's these. First of all, separation can create in us a barrier to experiencing comfort. Through this COVID lockdown, there are so many people in our communities who've lost loved ones and been unable to grieve. Funerals that have had to happen with hardly anybody there, and we're going to be living for years with people who've been separated from loved ones at the point of loss. And that can create a barrier to experiencing freedom and healing. Similarly, you've got suppression. We can squash our feelings down. When something happens, we can suppress that and say, I'm not going to look at that. But that suppression of the emotion can actually come out in other ways. We see people sometimes getting short or angry or reacting in unhealthy ways. When that emotion's been suppressed and that adrenaline's got to go somewhere, it might come out in poor health. But there are different ways that we can respond to sort of squash the feelings that come. Similarly, I'm going to say suggestion. We might have people suggest that we somehow had some responsibility for what had happened, and we might be living with the guilt. Maybe that comes if you've had a relationship breakdown, that somebody was blaming you, and you've carried that guilt, that sense of responsibility, that someone suggested you were responsible, and consequently you're afraid to open up your heart again, to know that healing that comes from being comforted. Another S that stops us from experiencing the comfort of a loving Father is the setting. We grow up in certain circumstances. We have family culture, family upbringings. In England we talk about having a stiff upper lip, and actually to express emotion might be a sign of weakness. Or quite simply, we just don't know how to respond. The setting that we grew up in, or the setting that we find ourselves in, can sometimes shape our response. Similarly, we've already touched on this, but that sense of safety. We don't feel safe. We didn't feel safe when we were struggling, so consequently we find it hard to comfort others, but also to receive comfort ourselves. And then we have social barriers. We live in a community that will respond in certain ways. We might try to fix a problem too early when actually somebody just needs to be comforted, and we're trying to come up with solutions. A big thing of our society is a lack of time. We need time and we need to be comforted, and people don't have it. And others, sometimes their responses in those situations can create barriers to us, where we put the shutters up and say, I'm not coming any closer, and I'm going to stay in this protective straitjacket because it's going to keep me safe. We don't experience the power of a comforting Father putting his arms around us and comforting us at our time of need. In the Psalms, the psalmist writes these incredible words, "Hide me under the shelter of your wings." It's a beautiful picture of a God protecting us, but also comforting us. And in our passage of Mary and Martha, we can see 7 examples of that can apply to how we can heal and overcome those feelings of broken intimacy that stop us experiencing comfort. The first one is this: witness the feelings. In verse 23, we see Jesus witnessing the feelings. He says to the sisters, your brother will live again. We then see him affirming the feelings in verse 25 when he says, I am the resurrection and the life. He recognises what they're going through. And thirdly, we see him empathizing with them. In verse 25, he says, your brother will live again. There's Jesus coming alongside and empathizing. Fourthly, he doesn't minimize their feelings. He says to them, everyone who believes in me will live. He doesn't minimize their feelings, but recognizes them. And then that famous verse in verse 35 where it says, Jesus wept. He offers affection. He then goes on from there to suggest action. He says to them, roll away the stone. And then finally he affirms the commitment to them. But he says, didn't I tell you that you would see him again? We have a God of comfort, and if we will allow him to come close to us, he will heal that brokenness that we have and allow us to be comforted in our pain. And whatever pain that we're living with, will you allow those lessons that we see from Jesus coming close to Mary and Martha to bring you that comfort of God, to heal you and set you free, to unlock your emotions to be able to live again and enjoy life and life in all its fullness?